pine bush.
It was a large, hairy animal, dark brown, black hair.
All of a sudden, this creature let out I want to call it a blood-curdling, growling, howling scream.
That's when I realized it wasn't my friend that had snuck up on me.
Dude, all the branches that are broken off are red.
That's crazy. There's no medulla. Hey, it's Mateo. Here's some updates about the website that's coming along. As you can see, we have a forum and we have a podcast and even like videos if you want to look at it from the website itself. But the podcast, we're converting over a lot of our videos into podcasts. So if you want to listen, go check that out. We also have a report encounter. So if you have an encounter, head over there, fill out that form, let us know. And of course, you can check out our About page. And something also really exciting and new is we have a merchandise. And you can come check out like mine and Glenn's designs, mainly Glenn's, but there's a lot of cool stuff on there that you can get, and that really helps us here at the channel and promote more field work. And of course, you can also find this on the channel itself, on the YouTube channel, under the store tag. So check that out too. Let us know what you think of those designs, and we'll try to do new ones. And if you're ever locally in the area of Colorado, nearby us, we also do tours. And you can look into that more if you're interested.
Welcome to Modern Explorer Perspectives, a place where we discuss Sasquatch and other related phenomena with people who approach the subject from different perspectives, not necessarily the same as our own. My name is Glenn Norberg. It's Mateo right here. And today we get to chat with Dr. Judd Burton. I got my notes here. Dr. Burton has a BA in history from Hardin-Simmons University, an MA in anthropology from Texas Tech University, a PhD in history from Texas Tech University, focusing on studies on early Christianity and Greco-Roman religions. He also studies topics such as the survival of mythology, sacred geography, folk religion, and contemporary alternative religious movements. He's a teacher, he travels the world exploring and does archaeology and has written a number of books, which we'll get into later. All that being said, hello, Dr. Burton, and welcome.
Hello, gentlemen. Good morning.
How is that? Did I miss anything?
No, you got it all.
I got it off your website, so it's awesome. Well, thank you for coming. This is exciting. Again, this is the first time we've ever done this, so I'm excited. This is going to be fun. And the main reason I wanted to reach out to you is we do interviews with people who have had Sasquatch encounters and such locally. And since we've started this in the past year, Mateo has had his own encounters up in Colorado Springs. Mm-hmm. Since we've started this, I've now gotten 3 dogman encounters. Now I can wrap my mind around Sasquatch reasonably well. Okay. But dogman to me just seems beyond. I just can't wrap my mind around it. Mateo's found some really cool stuff. But I guess I just wanted to see what your perspective was. I mean, you got a whole different not different worldview, but whole different background than we do. And so I just wanted to see what your thoughts were on the whole dogman phenomenon and all that stuff.
Well, I think like a lot of whatever appellation you want to attach to them, cryptid or folkloric creature, I think at the base of a lot of it is, if you're just doing a cultural analysis, that these things exist as shared cultural experiences. Yeah, and you can break that down into individual and societal elements. But I think just from the conventional academic community to just sort of brush all that aside as, exploited superstition is, it kind of speaks to the hubris of mainstream scholarship When these sorts of things occur in, let's say a mythological narrative, whether it's a written tradition or oral tradition, the most merit that it's usually given to is that it has some sort of inherent cultural value, which it does. But, to say that these things don't take place in real space and time, that they aren't, actual experiences, that the entities encountered aren't real, that's a pretty large order considering, the amount of, the number of sightings, just from the quantitative perspective. It doesn't, it doesn't really add up that something like a dogman or Sasquatch or whatever, take your pick, vampires or ghouls or whatever, that these would simply be pushed to the margins of accepted, on the academic level, accepted scholarship, but on the popular level, it's still sort of treated with a sort of mild disdain. It's okay for us to make TV series and movies about things like this, but
Right.
but to consider the reality is much more than your average person is really willing to do, and that's a whole other can of worms, I think.
I think that's the hard part is, a lot of this stuff, at least to my mind, Sasquatch, I've only been messing with this for about a year. Okay, really looking into this and hearing stories and testimonies and stuff, and it's grown, and it's like, wow, I really believe there's something out there. And then these dogman things come up, and that just blows up the paradigm in my mind to a degree. Mateo definitely is. We're trying to find some correct me if I'm wrong, Mateo, hard metaphysical evidence, and just like these things are real, right?
Well, as far as our aim and goal, like on like the channel's level, what we're doing is we're just we look for evidence, we analyze it, and we try to build like hypothesis and assumptions that we can actually test out. So that's kind of like the way like we've gone in that direction, which I think is good. It's slow, as you know, right? Like it's just one little thing after another, just trying to build up enough to get like it to the next step, which we've done. We've done pretty well. We've gotten like important people involved that can help us on this. But yeah, as far as that goes, that's definitely the direction.
Well, it's at least for us, and we brought you here to talk, so I don't want to blather here too much. I'm known for blathering. But what we're finding is it's more than just myth or, cultural, underlying cultural, how we explain things. That people are actually seeing some real things.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that there's a real long history of this forever, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess I wanted to maybe start from the history and where this all came from, but also get down to the nuts and bolts of why did some guy see something while driving up on the mountain, or while fishing, right? I'm trying to wrap my mind around that.
I had a question. You mind if I interject really quick? So I have this question. I think a lot of people don't realize this. How long did it take you to get your doctorate, like your PhD?
For the PhD, it took me about 5.5 years.
5.5 years, right?
Finish.
Like it's
like
you put a lot of time and investment to get up to a place where you can where you can be recognized, where you can be listened to, and so you can give these hypotheses and these theories. And I just want to point out, right, and I'd like to hear what you have to say. There's a reason why a lot of people aren't willing to look into these subjects, because they're putting a lot on the line, right? You're putting a lot on the line, like your whole livelihood to do that.
Right. I mean, and you can get you can easily get the Grover Krantz treatment. Grover Krantz advocated for years that Bigfoot was a remnant population of Gigantopithecus, which, in some cases it may very well have been, but he sort of got the Fox Mulder treatment,
Mm-hmm.
at Washington State, and that's one of the problems, and I don't want to delve too deeply into it, but I've seen it, having been an academic for 20 years, that that academic freedom is an illusion,
Exactly.
at least in university circles. And I hate to say that, but the fact of the matter is that if there was academic freedom, then any research agenda would be considered valid, and that's just not the case.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important that like you're talking about that, because it's something I don't think gets brought up enough, because people have like this ideology that, oh, well, if it was really for science, then you'd actually, then like these academics would be going after it, but they don't realize like the human element. You're a human, you have peers that you don't want to get ostracized from your community, from your jobs.
Right.
And that's something that's not taken into account, right? Like you're asking someone to go do something that could jeopardize their whole life.
Right. Well, and from my own experience, I mean, it's not that I love teaching and I still do it, but I have my own personal and kind of religious reasons for leaving mainstream academia. But the fact of the matter is that it's a hostile environment if you don't.
Yeah.
If your research agenda veers outside of the the bounds of accepted norms, and it was interesting for me. It was the giants in the Bible, which is a subject that I became interested in through studying early church literature, because the patristics were, the first 3 centuries of the church, they would reference this stuff, and I'm like, look, guys, whether you're religious or not, this is the history of ideas. I mean, it's, you should be able to respect it as intellectual history, and I didn't get a lot of that, to be quite frank.
Yeah. Well, and thank you, like for going on that adventure, like and looking in those directions, despite it, even like your credentials, because that's hard. That's hard. A lot of people that have those credentials in academia have been ostracized in their different fields, whether it's geology, anthropology, like you name it. So I just
Chef Meldrum is kind of one of those guys who's been doing this for decades, right? He's focused on the feet, and that's great, and he's really drilling down on that.
It's still like a fine line though that he walks.
But it's like I'm not gonna step beyond my foot. This line in the sand, I'm not gonna cross that into something weird. He's still staying the really physically super hard science and not letting, and I understand he's had some experiences and stuff, but he hasn't spoken out loud past his circle of comfort. Does that make sense?
Yeah. But I just wanted to make the point, like that these gentlemen like yourself, like you're like pushing the final frontier despite all the obstacles that you have to deal with, just to even talk about something a little outside like the box that's accepted within research and investigative parameters. So thank you. I just want other people to be more aware of that.
Absolutely.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm an explorer at heart. I always have been. I come from a line of explorers and soldiers. If you're going to break boundaries and change paradigms, you have to be willing to take risks, and you can't always do that playing it safe, or using the conventional plan, as it were. And so I'm actually happier doing it this way anyway.
Good, fantastic, as you should.
That's awesome. And I've seen also your YouTube channel. You definitely go into the classics and the teaching the value of why to do the classics, why to do
right. And that's another thing. Our again, I don't want to get on a soapbox or anything, but we've jettisoned a lot of the classical paradigms in our educational process. Well, where if we were sticking to the classical virtues of pursuing what was good, what was true, and what was beautiful, then these sorts of quote unquote unorthodox questions would find a more comfortable home for consideration. When you consider all of the innovators in Western tradition and Western civilization, all of those guys learned under a classical system. And that's not to say that it's the best, but it's one of the best. Particularly. But anyway, that's my boiled down version of the criticism of modern education.
Well, thank you for that. Okay, so I guess let's start from the back and come forward.
Okay.
And Mateo definitely also he digs into the old. Correct me if I'm wrong, and I don't want to misspeak. It's not my story, but loves getting into the original manuscripts and digging into all that stuff too. But specifically ecology on the dogman thing, willing definitely to go beyond that. But there's history from Egyptians and I'm sure Babylonians and anything else where this has been moving on forever. So can you give us a little history or a little teaching lesson?
Certainly. Well, our connection with animals, of course, goes back really far because we've only been farmers and city dwellers for about 10 or 12,000 years, basically. For most of human history, we've been hunters and gatherers, and that connection and indeed that spiritual connection, just on a cultural level, is exemplified in all kinds of rock art that you find all over the world, and that includes both prey animals and also animals that were predators of humans, ancient humans, because we weren't always at the top of the food chain, and so there's particularly when you begin to delve into the totemistic aspects of prehistoric religion, there's a deliberate attempt to not only connect with, but in many cases take on the attributes of an animal. And we get that in the sort of, the costumes and the fetishes and masks and things like that we find associated with not just prehistoric, but also non-literate, non-industrial peoples who are basically living, with a kind of Stone Age technology lifestyle. And so that idea of the connection and indeed melding between human and animal, including animals like wolves, goes back, tens of thousands of years, if not hundreds of thousands of years. Now, these sort of chimera that begin to crop up in the world mythology, with the combination of human and animal attributes, most people's familiarity with that in the ancient world comes from classical mythology, Greek mythology in particular, where you have creatures like satyrs and centaurs who combine, human and goat and human and horse. And you run into the same thing, of course, in the ancient Near East by proxy. The classical world is sort of our lens at looking into the more ancient worlds like the Mesopotamian and Egyptian. But you find the same thing amongst those people. Now, I have my own ideas about this. Whether this is a residue of totemism, or this is actually based on something that happened in real space and time. People can debate all the live long day. I don't necessarily think that the two are mutually exclusive, but coming from the worldview that I do, and not only as a Christian, but also as a scholar of the ancient world, it's very clear that this kind of iconography, this kind of imagery was very much to the fore in people's minds in antiquity. In other words, they were still thinking in terms of kind of the mythological mind, and I should probably qualify that by saying that I don't mean to use the term myth in a modern sense, but in the ancient world, mythology, philosophy, and history are all sort of in the same wheelhouse. They're all kind of the same thing. There's not that sharp line between history and myth that we draw today, and so that context contains a lot of these sort of chimerical creatures, and for the ancient Near East and the ancient Mediterranean world, a lot of those kinds of chimerical creatures, which end up more often than not being demigods of a sort. They have, in other words, they have a divine pedigree, according to the religion of a particular culture, and either a human or animal pedigree. Now, this is a story that gets churned again and again and again in the mythologies, not only of that region, but also around the globe. This idea that there were these celestial beings that came down and sort of tinkered not only with the human genome, but also with the animal genome. And, for lack of a better, phrasing, to put it in modern terms, they set out on a kind of genetic experimentation with the fauna of planet Earth. And, the result of this was an interesting bifurcation. You have, on the one hand, when it comes to the human genome, the result of this combination ends up in giants of various sorts. And with the animals, you end up with all of these half human, half animal creatures. Now, these are tales that are recounted not only in the Mesopotamian literature. You get it in Egypt. You also get it in the biblical tradition, particularly in the apocryphal, Second Temple period literature, which ostensibly was oral long before the Hebrews actually had a written language, talking about the pre-flood world. You get a little bit of it in Hesiod. Hesiod in Works and Days and Theogony is talking about the same kind of world, and you do get hints of that. There's an argument to be made that a lot of that is borrowed from the ancient Near Eastern tradition, but it's quite clear that these chimerical creatures, including human and canid creatures, have this very ancient origin, if you will.
So you're saying, correct me if I'm wrong, throughout history it's been kind of this common thread that has been, whether it starts from the ancient Near East and it's translated to the classical period and on forward, it's this, everybody's thinking this in some way, shape, or form. Everybody's thinking this.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and it, by the time you get to the classical period, well, even backing up before that, you could probably go as far as the archaic period, beginning about 800 BC in the Greek world. By that time, their mythology is pretty well formed. It had about 300 years to get churned out and codified by the bardic tradition that developed in ancient Greece between about 1100 and 800 BC. But by this time you've got stories of like Lucan, who was actually turned into a kind of wolf person by Zeus. Anytime you play hard and fast with the gods and mythological tradition, you get the you get the classic Godsmack, and that's what happened to this particular king, who was actually a ruler in the Arcadian region, I think. And there are also interesting later iterations. In my own research, a lot of what I've dealt with deals with the Mount Hermon episode in Judeo-Christian tradition, which a lot of listeners may be familiar with through Genesis chapter 6, the story of the fallen angels and the production of the first generation of giants. But at the foot of Mount Hermon is a little site called Peneus, which I helped to excavate and I actually wrote my dissertation on. Peneus was a shrine city dedicated to the Greek god Pan. And fast forwarding past the Greek period proper, when you get to the Roman era, the Romans celebrated a feast called Lupercalia. And even in that name, Lupercalia, the first part of it is wolf.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Now, there's been a lot of scholarship on Lupercalia, and I think T.P. Wiseman, the late classical historian, was right when he said that the god of the Lupercal was Pan because of his association with shepherds. Shepherds were always on the guard against wolves to protect their flocks. But what doesn't typically get dredged out in most discussions, for one reason or another, about the Lupercal, which takes place on February the 15th, is that there were rituals and apotropaics associated with the Lupercal, which were purposefully used to ward off not just wolves, but werewolf-type creatures.
Oh, interesting.
So, there are just a few examples of how these ideas about, canid human chimera have been ensconced in our, in a general way in our cultural memory, but in a specific way in our mythological and religious and folkloric memory for thousands and thousands of years.
Mateo, you'd mentioned, and feel free to chime in. I certainly don't want to, but you talked about the whole Babylonian, your and Mesopotamian, your reading and stuff of that, right, Mateo? And I know you said you wanted to kind of maybe talk about that a little bit too. So,
what's cool though is like this is right. Like this doesn't have to just pertain like this series that we're doing right here.
Yeah.
Like, we can talk about anything. It's called Modern Explorers, so we're exploring everything. So we don't have to keep it to here. But I want to share a story. Like one of my most exciting things was this first part wasn't exciting, but what I found over there is when I was in the Marine Corps, we went over to Iraq, and we were.
Thank you for your service, by the way.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad it's done. Today is the Marine Corps birthday. So it's
That's right. It is. Should we all sing the Marine? Should we sing the Marines hymn?
Well, let's go get a cake. Then we have to get wasted. Traditional, of course. Anyway, I was in infantry, so we were going out from Fallujah to this place called the Zidon. Terrible place, but it was right next to Euphrates, and you have all these like palm trees, like forests of palm trees sticking out of the ground, right? And we set up at one of these homes, and there'd be this huge dune coming out of along the river, out of the palm trees, which it looked really weird, right? Because that didn't look like it was supposed to be. It didn't look natural at all. But I didn't know any better back then. But I just kept looking at it because it's just this massive, huge dude. And so I finally come back to the States, and I have a friend he's a historian from the United Kingdom, and I told him about it. He loves the Akkadians, the Babylonians, the Sumerians, and so he's fascinated. And I show him on Google Earth where it was, and I tell him how it looked, and he gets really excited because he said the way I described it to him was the way the first Westerners that went over there described the tells of the ancient of these ancient cities that had just turned into like a big mound. And so a few months later, he gets back to me because he wants to know, right? and him and another historian have gone through, and they hypothesized that what maybe I stumbled upon was one of Nebuchadnezzar's slave cities that he built along the slave road, because of where it happened to be going towards, like Babylon. And so,
Oh wow.
that may have been, so it wasn't any register on for Western, books or anything, but obviously the locals knew about it. But that was really exciting. Like, there's still so much more to be found. There's a whole
Oh
city.
my,
It's
yes.
huge.
Yeah.
You got to show me that place on a map. That's cool. I want to see that on Google.
Yeah, I bet I can find it.
mean, even to this day, the Near East is littered with tales that aren't excavated. I mean, they're all over the place.
Absolutely. And there's whole buildings on top of like ancient ruins everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And some of those
In fact,
go on.
No, I was just going to say that one of the things that, because of the work that I've done in Israel, one of the things that I found was very interesting is that in the more populated, because Israel is a small country anyway, and I mean you could start a rose garden and you're going to find coins or pot shards or something. Because you're just on top of it. I mean, and in the bigger cities like Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, the Antiquities Authority would literally buy houses and gut out the bottom of them and do they would excavate under the house. I mean, because it was getting, particularly in the more populated areas, it was getting to where unless you had open space or it was on government property or something like that, you just that's the only way you were going to get it done.
Yeah, that's so cool. It's amazing, like the stuff that like is still to be found, right? So I grew up in South America.
Right.
My father's Ecuadorian, and I remember like I was at my friend's house. He lived out like closer, like towards like going towards the Amazon, so towards like the east from Quito, where I grew up, and they were adding an extension onto their house, and the construction workers found tons of figurines from like Inca, pre-Inca, like I don't remember. I was too young. They might have been pre-Inca, like Iquitos. And that's one of the first things that got me like excited and started making me think, like, well, what else is down there? Like there's just hundreds of them that they found before like they built the rest of the house there. And there was like shrines and places built into the cliff nearby. So there's still so much, even now, even today, to be discovered.
Yeah, I did some work in Peru back in 2013, and the thing that struck me when we were driving through Lima, and the cab driver said, "That's a pyramid right there." I thought it was a construction site. I mean, it had a chain link fence around it, and it looked, just looking at it, it just looked like a mound of dirt. But I said, "Wait a minute, turn around, I want to see that." And so we stopped, and you got up close and you could see the outline of the bricks that were actually crumbling. He was like, there's like 4 or 5, that the universities, partitioned off right here in the city. So yeah, I mean, it's we're all literally walking on top of older cultures and civilizations. And as far as the amount of archaeology that's been done, we just statistically, we barely scratched the surface of the earth, and we're able to do so much more now with digital imaging and Lidar and things like that. It's really kind of an exciting time to be an archaeologist, and because of all the technology is letting us do.
I was looking on Google Earth, and you can see some of these ancient walls that were built by whoever, tens of thousands of years, however long ago. These huge walls that are like, we never even noticed this until we saw it in satellite. Then it's like, oh yeah, you can see it, and it's amazing the technology that is just revealing what's in front of us, just like a mound that's a hill. And then you look at it a little closer and go, hey, that's more than just a hill.
Speaking of technology, I love remote sensing. Like, that's one of my favorite things to do. And
invaluable.
Absolutely. So when I was in Afghanistan, I was doing like intelligence work. So I got to like see satellite imagery, and I did really well. But they put us to a place where no coalition force had ever been before. We were like right on like this on the Silk Road where we had these ancient caravansaries.
Sure.
Were really cool, but that's a whole another story in itself. But so like right next to us, we were in Baco province and part of Farah province, and Farah itself is a city that's really close to Herat, and it borders, Iran. And
Yeah.
I got like these beautifully detailed, colored satellite imagery that you could get really close in, and I was able to see like in Farah there's this huge wall, like just massive ancient wall with ancient ruins inside. And I asked the locals, and they said it was like a great conqueror that came through like a long time ago and like married into the kingdom of Herat.
Mm-hmm.
And so more research showed this used to be a huge like a Parthenon, and the walls of it from Alexander the Great, and the walls are still there. The walls are still clear.
Yeah.
It was just like the coolest
That's
thing ever.
amazing.
And I almost got a chance to go over there, and I was always like let's go. Oh no, I want to go. We're gonna go over there. But of course, the war zones, nothing ever works out.
Right.
Plan.
Sure.
Yeah. But it's still there.
I would imagine. I would imagine that the legacy of Alexander's expedition into Asia will be turning up, for as long as we do archaeology, basically.
Yeah. It's huge. And it's like
I mean,
thousands of years old. It's still
And
like standing, the walls.
Yeah, certainly. It's an exciting time to be an archaeologist. The thing that struck me is that I basically had to shift gears mid-career, because I had learned old school, on the survey transit and the Alidade, which I think is still valuable. I think it's kind of a rite of passage, and students still need to know, how to do that sort of thing. But gosh, you go out into the field with your tablet or smartphone, and you've got just about everything you need.
Right. Yeah.
Short of actually digging into the earth. I mean, you've got all of the. It's amazing the attachments you can buy for your smartphone. That basically turns your smartphone into a survey transit.
It's literally like a Star Trek transit, like a tricorder.
Yeah, we're right there.
Right?
They're carrying around these computers, and it's just it's kind of amazing. And but for the cartographic end of it, you can do all the survey and mapping. You need to. There are all kinds of programs and apps for cataloging, your artifacts. I mean, you got a camera, you take pictures from all kinds of angles, all kinds of resolutions. It's really, really an exciting time, I think, in archaeology and anthropology.
Oh, definitely. I have a question to you, because this is my opinion, and I get really excited when I think about it. Is like we have Nevada and like we have Utah and New Mexico, the deserts areas. That during the last ice age were like huge freshwater lakes, like paradises. We had like all the pictographs there. We had huge megafauna. But I feel like those areas of the United States have been explored the least, because right now, like a lot of they're really inhospitable, and I feel like there we're going to find a lot of really unique and interesting things in once we start like exploring the.
Yes, I think I agree with that. I think that's a very interesting cultural corridor in North America. But I think it's easy for us to compartmentalize and forget just how different of a world, culturally and environmentally, ecologically, that the Earth was, at that time, the end of the last ice age, going into the late Pleistocene, going into the Holocene epoch. It's there were megafauna because the atmosphere was more oxygen rich. It was a strange, almost in the picture I get in my mind is from like the original Star Trek, when they go down on the away team, and there's this planet that they've never explored before. That's what it would have been like stepping into that for all intents and purposes, antediluvian world.
Oh man, absolutely. Like imagine looking up north and seeing like a huge, like a wall of ice, you know, like where like the ice was forming, you know. Like,
yeah, and I mean, just think, you know, how many of our little eccentricities that we have now may be, you know, culturally determined, psychologically determined by our experiences, you know,
yeah,
thousands
absolutely.
of years ago because of imagery like that, you know, or we're reticent to go near ice because it was just around in such hulking, you know, amounts at the time. I don't know. It's probably the same reason why you know, statistically pictures of grasslands and savannas are very calming to us because we lived in grasslands and savannas for so long.
Well, that's funny.
Yeah.
Somebody was talking about how, why are we afraid of the dark? Is it because we've been told to be afraid of the dark, or is it something deep inside us to say, I'm afraid of the dark, right?
Right.
I saw somebody on a comment at one point talk about that.
Well, and I don't necessarily think that the two have to be mutually exclusive, you know. So I could see an ecological component as an anthropologist, but I could also see a spiritual component, you know, that there were these entities in real space and time that did scare and mess with, you know, fill in the blank human beings. But I think, you know, like I said, I don't think that the two necessarily have to be mutually exclusive. There's room for, you know, shaping experiences that are simply environmental, and then there's room for the spiritual too.
Well, I want to bounce out because you just kind of came back to the whole dogman thing.
Right.
I mean, obviously, I showed you the video. The guy up here, he saw something driving on the road with his wife.
Right.
Something that is almost unexplainable. Mateo had found something really cool though, and so I want to
refresh my memory. Where was that video taken out?
It was just outside of Fremont County. It was right on the border of
Colorado
Fremont County and Custer County.
Gosh, I was going to say that territory looks really familiar because, you know, I was telling you that I used to fish and camp and hang out in Cachera and Levita, kind of that area of Huerfano County.
Yeah.
It's fun, you know, there's a place there called the Dog Bar, and I thought, how appropriate is that? We're talking about dogman. And, but I love that country, by the way, where you guys are.
I'm going to...
especially 4x4.
Okay, Mateo, I'm glad you're copying this because I'm jumping around my screen and I'm going to different things. So keep your screen on, but I'm going to allow...
Okay.
I'm going to...
Maybe we can just go B-roll in there later. Like,
pull up your picture on your computer because I want to show...
Wait, which picture?
Should I call you Judd, Dr. B, Dr. Burton?
You can call me Judd. That's fine.
Okay, Judd. Let me pull this up.
I'm just a kid from West Texas. I just have a lot of alphabet soup after my name.
That's how I figured. Mateo found this. It's really kind of cool. He was goofing around as soon as we heard this dogman story.
So basically, right? Like, you know, like it took me a while just to accept and try to see like how the ecology could form for something like Sasquatch to occur, but something like dogman, the way it's like described, you know, like we see it more like as a werewolf, right? Like it's like that's kind of like I'm like, well, where do I place that? And obviously, it's just natural for us as humans to try to place things in a place that we can understand it better in our worldview.
Right.
So I was trying to like understand what this could be. So I decided, you know what, I'm going to look at cryptids in Africa. You know, like see what's there because we already have Megafauna over there still existing. And what I stumbled upon was this thing that people have come across over and over and called the Nandi Bear. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but basically it's like this creature that's very much described in a lot of like situation experiences, a lot like our dogman, except over there because they have other relations, you know, like to Megafauna and other types of animals that live there, and the fossils of them. It's easier for them to say like, oh, well, I think it's in this case a giant baboon, which I didn't realize like it even existed in the fossil records, but apparently like it existed and it's very well like you know, adapted to the environment. And anything big, and I'm gonna just come over here really quick. Let me see. Let me share the screen.
Because then I have to go to the screen and allow it to show up. So it's pretty cool. It was like, what the heck is this?
So
there we go.
obviously, like, we don't know for sure if this is what it was, right? But the way it moves and like the fact that it's that big, and we all know, like, studying baboons, if you ever looked at them or into them, they can be highly aggressive,
Absolutely.
like, creatures. Yeah, you know. And so
Can you zoom in on that photo? Is that possible, Mateo?
this one, I might be able to click it. Let's see.
Here we go.
Oh, it's not as good as. So anyway, it was considered like a giant, like a baboon, which is what some people hypothesized. Obviously, like I said before, we don't know for sure. But if something like a Sasquatch, assuming like it is like one of the many hominids that migrated and proliferated like around like the old world and made it over here, then why couldn't something like an apex predator like a baboon? Like, imagine getting big enough that you don't necessarily need like to group and you can survive cold weather and have that intelligence, but still have like the same like canines and power and capability of a baboon. That's scary. That's like almost like an intelligent shark on land, if it is correct.
Yeah,
you know.
It was really interesting when you showed me the description from
let's go
Lynn
back to that.
of the tail.
The tail and the mane, and they could easily go on both like 2 legs and 4. And maybe they adapted to be able to do it better. Because we know, I don't know which hominid species it was, but they're finding out like these hybrid ones, right? Like where like their hips allow them to be just as effective, like walking bipedally, as well as like a quadruped.
I'm going to close this unless you're pulling up some other pictures.
No, I can leave it there.
Okay, I'm just going to drop it.
So it's just a thought. Obviously, this might help explain. Like, it's something that we're seeing here, and something that's also still been seen, like in Africa and other parts of the world.
Sure.
That might be described as like a dogman that could easily go on 2 feet. And we know like bipeds, anything that can go on 2 feet will to be able to see further away or to look bigger, more challenging. So it's not outside like the realm of possibility. But it did strike me as interesting.
Well, and if we're looking at pockets of primate populations, first of all, they're very intelligent. We already know from populations that are well established and existent that if they don't want to be seen, they won't be seen. That they're intimately familiar with their environments. Mm-hmm. We still have remote, at least in most places of the world, and certainly in this hemisphere, we still have very vast stretches of remote territory where people seldom venture into. So nothing would surprise me. That's why the argument that I always get about Sasquatch is that we ought to have a pelt or something by now, or I'm like, well,
study decomposition just a little bit for a fraction.
We do, exactly. I mean, and plus we don't know how we know very little about the social organization. Do these animals have a culture that deals specifically with the interment of their dead? We don't know, and so we're always discovering, almost on a daily basis, new flora and fauna on this planet. Why would it surprise us that there are these populations of very very intelligent hominid creatures who evade our detection because they know their ecology infinitesimally better than we know it. Mm-hmm. That's why when I hear, I've heard about stories from the Yukon, about bears that are bigger than grizzlies. Well, the last time that we had bears bigger than grizzlies was the end of the Pleistocene, the short-faced bear. If that's the case, I certainly wouldn't want to run into one of these things. But it doesn't surprise me that there would be a pocket of you would think that would be the kind of climate that they would end up in, considering that's the last recorded evidence that we have that short-faced bear were found in. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
You know, just as another piece of anecdotal evidence, one of my physical anthropology professors when I was in grad school, he did his master's thesis on a monkey in Southeast Asia that was believed to be only mythological. But then the further he delved into it, you know, the natives said, no, we revere this monkey, but it's also a real thing. And, you know, the name escapes me as to the name of the monkey, the species, but, you know, he found it. It ended up being a real thing. So, you know, nothing surprises me in terms of the if there's room for discovery of new animals like that, then there's room for cryptids in the world too.
Absolutely.
Clearly.
Well, and we barely know things about like known animals. Like we could only scratch the surface of like elusive animals like a mountain lion, of actually seeing like its actual like daily life, how it interacts, like what is it like. We don't know that stuff, and that's an animal we know exists. We know very much, so that it's around. So
okay, so I know that. I know that people are going to be watching this and going, yeah, right. Okay, we live down by Pueblo, Colorado. We're high plains. I've got a story from a kid who, and I'm going to be posting it shortly, who was down fishing by the reservoir. This kid was traumatized, there's no doubt. I mean, shaken, not stirred. His friends both went south after this encounter. All three of them saw something that paced the vehicle, he thinks at about 50 plus miles an hour, turboed in front of the vehicle, cut to the other side of the road, locked up its brakes, and then stood up and stared down these guys as they passed and said, it grinned at me. And it didn't have a tail, much unlike the baboon that we saw, which is what then happened. But I heard another encounter. Somebody else saw something that very much matched the description I heard in Sasquatch Chronicles. This kid saw something. It kicked up a cloud of dust. It wasn't just a hallucination. It wasn't some cultural thing in the background. Something was there that severely rattled this guy and his friends. And he was describing shoulders, you know, kind of like the baboon, right? That's huge shoulders, waist and stuff. But his description was, I mean, as he was telling me his story, he had a 1,000-yard stare looking at a rock, right? And he was shaking and almost crying as he was reliving this encounter. So people are having current hardcore encounters that, you know, if you just write it off as myth, as, you know, this is something that people have been thinking about, or it's a cultural, you know, memory or whatever that they're using to explain something. It's like, no, this was something real. And that's why I reached out, because I can't really wrap my mind around that. This has been helping this conversation, but it's very hard for me to wrap my mind around the, I mean, because again, if you're talking the Yukon out in the middle of nowhere to have giant bears, okay, that's out in the middle of nowhere. But we're talking, people would say and look at this and go, this is Pueblo. People live here. People go boating on that reservoir all the time. People go up and down that river all the time. Why there? That's why they can't, I think that's why a lot of people can't believe it.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that, because at first it was hard for me to just like accept that it's so close to people. But that's because we were going with a lot of assumptions. The assumption is that they're trying to stay away from us, that they're afraid of us. But I think the evidence is supporting that they're not as afraid of us as we think. They just know how to like stay hidden. And there's natural resources like along the river and stuff to, well, any animal. That's why most of the animals come down from the hills, the foothills in the more arid climates, right down to the river during like the summer months, because you have water, you have a lot more grass, and it's just there's more resources there, and that's going to incentivize other predators to come down to that area too. We just assumed that they wouldn't come through where people were by, and I think we were wrong. We were very wrong on that.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, I just reiterate that there's, there should be room in not only scholarly consideration, but there should be room in popular consideration too. But it's just that, again, we've been so conditioned, I don't want to wax conspiratorial, but, social and cultural engineering is, it's a real thing. And we're we have to rail against it, because we live in a fantastic world. Whatever worldview people subscribe to, there are really weird things that we don't understand. I mean, we've entered the quantum age for one. Mm-hmm. It amazes me how myopic and closed-minded, some people can be about these things, just because in many cases they're outside of their own personal experiences. I think as a society and culture, we have to struggle to get past that.
Hey kid, don't ever let them get inside your head. They'll tell you what to do in life instead of everything you know that you could get. Don't let them guide your life towards regret. I'll fight for what I love with every breath. My past is filled with things I won't forget. I use them all to push me to my best. So treat the worst of times just like a test. If only I could go back in time, I'd tell myself that everything will end up alright. Just push yourself, test yourself, figure out what you like, and find your limits, don't be rigid, always work towards a prime. Surround yourself with open minds, people can change your life. A few friends with intent can help you feel alive. Find a passion, take some action, and with a little time, just be patient, make a statement, try to enjoy your life. They'll try to kick you while you're down. They wanna rise up while you drown. They wanna fill your head with doubt. They're silently scared that you'll figure it out. I'll make it look like I'm losing, won't bother hiding my bruises.